Jesus was a phenomenal storyteller. Anybody of you guys know really good storytellers? I mean, when you think back through some good teaching, isn't there usually a story thrown in there? And I think Jesus knew that we don't remember concepts as well unless they're tied to a story. So one of the best storytellers that I know was my Aunt Callie, I think she was my great-great Aunt Callie. She lived to be 106 years old. Now, I know that I had met her when I was a tiny little girl, but the time that I really remember was when I was about 12 years old, and I literally sat at her knees and listened to her tell stories. She was probably mid to late 90s at that point. So first of all, that's crazy at that age, thinking that somebody could actually be that old, right? So I'm sitting there listening to her tell stories about when she was a widow, and a young widow, very young widow, and had two tiny little boys, and she had no money. And she would tell stories about how she would kneel down beside the bed with her little boys, and they would pray and ask God to provide for them. And then, lady, she told me about how she'd show up one day coming back to her house, and there were bags of groceries sitting on her kitchen counters, and she had no idea how they got there. Checks would arrive in the mail. And I was astounded as this 12-year-old little girl hearing this, because I never experienced that kind of need. I grew up in an upper middle class family. We never lacked for anything. So it was just astounding that God would answer prayers in that way. Now fast forward my early married years, my husband and I had 3 kids by then. They were little bitty. And we went through what I affectionately call our financial famine, which lasted for far too many years. But it was the stories from Aunt Callie. You know, she could have just said, Sarah, God will provide. Okay. But that wouldn't have stuck in my heart the way her stories did. So then when I'm this young mom, 30 or so, and we start having serious financial problems, I remember Aunt Callie's stories, and they transformed the faith that I had that God would provide, and I saw him provide in some pretty crazy ways as well. We need to find ways to tell our children, as well as the people that we disciple, the stories of things that God has done in our lives, because that's what they'll remember. And then the principles will follow out of that.